everyone. I want to get us started with today's panel. Thank you for coming to Advocacy for Young Adults. This will be our breakout session right now. If you haven't met me yet, my name is Courtney Felly. I'm the YAR Program Manager here at the Every Life Foundation for Rare Diseases. I'm also, perhaps somewhat obviously, a young adult with a rare disease, and very excited to lead this program that you'll hear more about. I'm going to pass it first to Alexis and then to Kyle, our YAR speakers today, to also introduce themselves. Should I? You'll do it? Okay. This is just your intro, Alexis. Okay. Want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Lexi Levine. I am a young adult representative. I'm here today on behalf of my younger brother, Barry, who was diagnosed with Jordan syndrome, and I'm representing New York.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kyle Underwood. I am a rare disease patient. I have Hunter syndrome, also known as mucopolysaccharidosis 2, and we're looking forward to share about my story and about advocacy here.
Awesome. I'm going to get us started just with some general YAR information. I know a lot of folks in the room might be familiar with YAR, so I'll try to be pretty brief so we can get to Alexis and Kyle's stories. I first want to thank our 2023 YAR sponsors for making this event possible and investing in the next generation of rare disease advocates. So for those of you who are not yet familiar, the Young Adult Rare Representatives, or YAR, is a program of the Every Life Foundation for advocates who are between 16 and 30. It's folks with any personal connection to rare disease who are part of the community and interested in advocacy. And we sort of have different opportunities throughout the year for folks to gain skills and practice and invest in advocacy. You can maybe see a few folks here today on the screen. So some specific opportunities, we host monthly General Assembly meetings and try to foster connections between folks in the rare disease community as a space, as you might be aware, where there are not always a lot of young adults around to get to know each other and advocate on specific issues from a young adult perspective. We also have some different leadership opportunities around professional skill development, public speaking, public policy, and leadership development throughout some of the opportunities that you'll see on the screen and get to talk a little bit with folks about. The main thing that brings us here today is the YAR policy campaign. This is part of YAR that started last year, and we have been allowing members of the group to vote on different issues that they really want to advocate for collectively throughout the year from a young adult perspective. Some of the pictures that you'll see on the screen are from last year's YAR policy campaign, where members chose to advocate for the Speeding Therapy Access Today, or STAT Act. This year, with the new Congress, we've been deciding to focus on a policy area, and I'm pleased to say that the one YAR members collectively voted to advocate for was on ensuring access to approved treatments. There's a pretty big landscape of access legislation out there and relevant policies and issues. I encourage you, if you want to see more about this, particularly from the young adult angle, to go to hearusyar.org. There are write-ups of what some of the different YAR policy campaign options were, as well as why young adults chose this one and what the specific perspective is. Some of the sample policy proposals that would fall under this that you have maybe heard of would be the Help Ensure Lower Patient or Help Copays Act, the Access to Genetic Counselor Services Act, the Medical Nutrition Equity Act, or MNEA, and the STAT Act Early Payer Engagement Provision, especially for those of you who were involved in the STAT Act advocacy last year. Alexis and Kyle will both also talk more about specific legislation and other policy issues that connect to their stories and how that looks for you in practice and connecting your story to some of these policy issues. With all of that, I'm going to pass this to Alexis to start taking us through her story.
So a fun fact about myself is that I am part of the 3 to 5% of the typically developing population that has benign macrocephaly, or basically I have a really big head for no good reason. So when my younger brother Barry was born when I was 2, and he also had a very large noggin, it was initially not cause for concern. He also had a small hole in his heart, but that's pretty common. So again, we took him home thinking he was a typically developing baby. That is until he was about 6 weeks old, when he developed RSV pneumonia and was hospitalized for the first of countless times to come. As his infection cleared, doctors told us that they had major concerns about his development. So they sent us to a neurologist. The neurologist told us that Barry was not a jumpy baby like we thought. Those were seizures, and he was having anywhere from 30 to 100 per day. He also diagnosed Barry with hypotonia, a global developmental delay, and failure to thrive, and of course, macrocephaly. Honestly, the list went on and on. So next, he sent us to a geneticist who started all of these tests for Barry. And it always struck me how doctors would describe Barry as so abnormal, yet all the tests kept coming back as normal. So the geneticist told us at that time in 1998, we may never have the answer as to what was causing Barry's issues. And he was to be diagnosed with an unspecified neurological condition, which basically meant they had no idea what was going on. But through it all, Barry was a happy little boy, like you see here, always smiling. He loved spending time with his family, watching TV, and listening to music. And as he grew, he was actually able to achieve some milestones that a lot of people thought he never would. At the same time, his condition unfortunately worsened. He developed a lot of comorbidities, needed a lot of surgeries, and eventually his seizures became grand mal seizures. As they continued to worsen, it appeared that his disease was neurodegenerative, because as the seizures worsened, he began to lose function. So this prompted us to do whole exome sequencing in 2013. And again, it revealed nothing of significance. Unfortunately, Barry's condition continued to worsen until he passed away on March 3rd, 2015, at age 16, still undiagnosed. It's not lost on me that Barry passed away so close to Rare Disease Day. I wish more than anything he was here this week to see all the amazingness that is happening, but I can't think of a better way to honor him. So fast forward 4 years, I found myself working for Barry's former neurologist, conducting spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, clinical trials. And one day, I received a new patient who reminded me a lot of Barry. So it prompted my boss and I to begin talking about Barry's case and how it was such a mystery. He gave me a few suggestions as to how I could reopen the case and have his exome reanalyzed. And about 4 months later, I got a call from one of the genetic counselors I had been working with, and she said, "We found it." And I said, "You found what?" Because honestly, I didn't even let myself consider the idea that we would find the answer, because we had gotten our hopes up so many times in the past just to not find the answer. But this time, what she had found was that Barry was the 106th person to be diagnosed with Jordan syndrome, or a mutation in the PPP2R5D gene. My advocacy journey truly started the day Barry was born. Ever since I was little, I felt the need to be Barry's protector, whether that mean correcting someone when they use the R word, teaching providers how to interact with a person like Barry, or helping my mom fight for whatever Barry needed that insurance loved to deny. Through my work in SMA and my journey to Barry's diagnosis, I received the Rare Champion of Hope Rising Star Award by Global Genes in 2020. From there, I started doing various podcasts and interviews and panels, like you see up in the top corner there, at the West Coast Summit of Hope Pediatric Palliative Care Summit. And then I had submitted Barry and I's story to the Every Life Story Bank contest, and we actually were selected as one of the winners. So that's how I first started to get involved with Every Life, and I met the amazing Britta, and she told me about YAR, and so I started to get more involved this past April. I was able to attend the YAR Speakers Bureau, which I would highly recommend. It helped me be prepared to give a speech like this today, and also prepared me to go to Boston State Advocacy Day, where I was able to advocate with other rare disease advocates for various pieces of legislation, including the Fail First Act. And basically, this was an act that would prohibit step therapy. Step therapy is a practice of insurance that basically states you have to fail on a less expensive treatment before you can qualify for a more expensive treatment, even if that first treatment isn't really appropriate for you. The work that was done that day by advocates actually led to approval of this bill in Massachusetts and the ending of this practice in Massachusetts. From there, I was able to participate in Rare Across America this past August, and again had the chance to share my story with legislators and help push rare disease legislation forward, like the Help Copay Act. Lastly, I'm now the sibling support coordinator for Jordan's Guardian Angels, or the foundation that's raising money to find a treatment and maybe even a cure for Jordan syndrome. As such, I was able to help create Project Halo, which is a resource center for siblings of people with Jordan syndrome, and also become a SIB shop facilitator, where I'm able to run SIB shops or workshops for people with a sibling who has a life-threatening illness or disability to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly about being a SIB. The truth is, if Barry was still alive, his diagnosis of Jordan syndrome wouldn't help him. And that's because there's currently no treatment for Jordan syndrome. The good news is we have an extremely dedicated team of researchers working to fix that problem as we speak. I am lucky enough to get to sit on the team of research as a family representative and stay up to date in the research, but also I'm working with them to write the standard of care guidelines for the disease. I hope to one day join the team officially as a doctor. But this team is more than dedicated. They're selfless. And that's because as each of them joined the team, they agreed that any treatment that they developed, they would not benefit from financially. They would also have no ability to set the price of the treatment. And that's the way Jordan's Guardian Angels was established by parents at the time. They had the ideas of ensuring access to approved treatments on their minds, whether knowing it or not, because they wanted to ensure that any future treatment developed would be accessible to anybody with Jordan syndrome. But it shouldn't have to be this way. Parents and caregivers who are already fighting for everything their loved one needs shouldn't also have to fight for the right to get their child or loved one treated. I first learned this lesson when I worked in SMA. I would see my patients daily be scared to go to their physical therapy evaluations because they knew if they lost even 1 point of function on their tests, that could be the fuel insurance needed to take away their treatments that were keeping them alive. And then I watched as SMA got added to the newborn screening panel, and very excitingly, a gene therapy get approved for SMA. Now, I say it's a near cure. I know the medical community does not like the word cure, but if this treatment is given within the first few days of life, it can basically prevent the disease. Then I watched this treatment get priced at over $2 million and be essentially inaccessible to most patients who need it. I vowed that I was going to do everything in my power to prevent that from happening to any future disease, and especially Jordan syndrome. I think that if Barry had been diagnosed via newborn screening, maybe he would have been able to say even just one word. And if we had been able to get his seizures under control, I can't imagine all the things he could have accomplished. And if we could have prevented the neurodegeneration and potential Parkinson's disease that we're learning more about in this disease every day, maybe Barry would have been here today fighting this fight with me. Thank you.
Well, that's a tough act to follow. I think we should do another round of applause. That was awesome. So hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. This is actually my second Rare Disease Week. I was here in February of 2022, or 2020. We knew what happened after that. But I'm excited to share my story, and really, as much as it's me sharing about myself, I look forward to learning from you all as well. So for me, my advocacy journey started when I was diagnosed at 4 years old with Hunter syndrome. And at the time, there was no known newborn screening for it, so that's why my diagnosis was a little bit later in life. It led, my diagnostic journey was very interesting because it was kind of happenstance. I had a lot of chronic ear infections and actually was hospitalized for an eye infection, and it just so happened that the provider rounding was a well-known geneticist, and they said, hey, there's something not right here. And they decided, let's do a couple tests, things like that, and that's, lo and behold, I was diagnosed with Hunter syndrome, and at that time, my mom was pregnant with my brother, who also has it. So it was at that time, I can only imagine what my parents were going through, but I'm glad I could be here today to share my story. For those who don't know, Hunter syndrome is a lysosomal storage disease that affects every part of the body. I have an attenuated form, which allows me to do a lot of things of normal activities, but there is a more severe form, and that's what we're really fighting for. There is no known cure, but there is a approved treatment that I started in 2009, and MPS II was actually added to RUS in 2022. So that was a big win, and thanks to all the support from our advocates to do that. And then as we look to the future, a lot of our focus is on continued research and advocacy for gene therapy and other treatment. And the reason I want to share kind of where Hunter syndrome ties to advocacy, what I'm doing in ensuring access to treatments, is while there is a known treatment for it, it's not an end-all, be-all. And also from that perspective, that the treatment that I'm getting requires weekly infusions that are very costly. We have the fourth highest cost drug in the world, and thankfully I have an employer that pays for it, but that is a challenge. So I do like to always highlight the photo. So I think that was me when I started my treatment. That's the first time I ever got it. And there's me at 4 when I was diagnosed. I was a pretty cute baby, I think. And then there's me at my current employer at the Cleveland Clinic. So I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, but originally from San Diego. So that's where I work. And they allow me to remote work and get my treatment at the same time, which is really awesome. So that's a little bit about me. So my advocacy journey. I love photos, as you can tell, but I've been very fortunate to, start getting involved in advocacy most recently. I honestly wasn't in advocacy full time like I am now until I got into my adolescence, young adulthood. I think for me, it took my kind of deciding to own my story and really understand what rare disease meant to me and really be comfortable in that. So, Rare Disease Week in 2020, that was my first kind of foray into it. I was scared, but we did it, and here we are. I also got the ability to speak at the NORD Living Rare, Living Stronger Patient and Family Forum in 2022, really highlighting the importance as advocates to understand our why and why we're here to make a difference in the world. I'm very fortunate to be on YAR, RDLA. Also, I'm the vice president of Project Live, which is a not-for-profit for my condition, also on the National MPS Society. But one thing I do want to highlight, and I think sometimes we fail to mention this, is we are part of these groups and we're part of this larger community, but the people that surround us in our advocacy journey, the ones that maybe don't necessarily have a rare disease or maybe haven't gone through the health challenges, are the ones that get us through these things. So the photo of all the people, those are the people that basically raised me and my family. They're very important to my journey, and they are the ones that supported me to get to where I'm at today. And in the bottom photo here, these are some of my best friends that I actually met in the last 2 years, and I moved to Ohio, and they are always a big proponent of me. And in this photo here is very special. This is me working at the Cleveland Clinic, and this is a little boy named Hendrix who has the same condition as me. And I was able to round with some patients, and he happened to be there, and share my story and give a sense of hope for him that what he could be eventually. So that goes to show you, as advocates, whether you're advocating on behalf of yourself or a loved one in your community, that you do have inspiration to inspire others. And something I always like to leave with, and looking at these photos, is we're always on this path to diagnose and find a diagnosis. It's amazing. But at the end of the day, in a world full of definitions, we really want to be undefined. We're all unique. And I want to encourage you guys to live that out each day in your advocacy journey. So where does this all tie into? The ask around ensuring access to approved treatments, it's very personal to me. Like I said earlier, there is a known treatment. However, it doesn't affect the neuropathic effects. So the individuals that are on the more severe spectrum, unfortunately, have effects that the brain. They become wheelchair bound, and they typically have a shortened lifespan. So that's one of the reasons why we want to push for more research and development in that space. But then once we get treatment and have access to it, there's a lot of barriers. I can tell you, one is the cost. I'm very thankful that my insurance company pays for my co-pays, and I have a great employer that covers the rest of it, but that's one issue. Another one I think is, the day-to-day life is significant challenges that are faced, even if you have treatment. So where are things that we can do to make sure treatments not only affect, the symptoms of the disease, but the larger challenges that come with it as a day-to-day living. As we look to access to more treatment and trials and gene therapy, I think the biggest thing we need to focus on is how we making sure we're being equitable in our approach. So, with rare diseases, we all have it's a small community, but with a loud voice. And I think sometimes with our treatments and what we're trying to provide is how can we best make our ask seem like it's going to make a big impact. And what I always say to people is, one person has a story, and that story can make an impact on the future of the world. One of us can go cure cancer. One of us can go solve world peace. And if it wasn't for treatments like this and having access to it, maybe that couldn't happen. My goal as I look into my own community and encourage you all to advocates is learning yours is continue to lean into your why, know what you're doing, and be passionate about what you're doing, because the small progress is going to lead to big change. So thank you again for the time, and I really appreciate it learning about you two as well.
There we go. Thank you so much. Is this working?
This one?
Thanks, Alexis. Thank you so much to Kyle and Alexis for this. I'm going to move to the next slide. If y'all want to take a photo of this or otherwise write down contact information for Kyle and Alexis, if you want to follow up more one-on-one or after this, I definitely encourage you to do so. We're also going to open for some questions right now if anyone in the room has questions either for a specific panelist or in general about anything we've covered today on advocacy for young adults. Brittany, do you want to start? I'm going to make you wait a second. I feel like someone in the room should have a mic for you.
I just don't know how to turn it on.
Half the battle.
Yep. Oh, classic. That's fitting. All right. Is it you had a question?
Yeah. Can you tell us about the first time that you felt compelled to share your story with a group and how you overcame the initial fear of public speaking?
Alexis, you want to start?
I can jump in. Is this one working? Can you hear me? Okay, awesome. That's a great question. For me, I was kind of highlighting earlier, I had to be confident in my own self. And a lot of that came down to understanding that my diagnosis didn't necessarily define who I was. It was a part of me, but isn't me. And learning that I could use my story and my journey to make a difference in people's lives. So it was actually, I was in high school, about to enter college, and I had the opportunity to speak to a large group of students about my specific condition for a biology class. And, I was scared, I was nervous, but I went into it, and I just felt it was very natural and raw. And when I finished that conversation, one of the individuals came up to me and said, I have this rare disease, and you encouraged me to speak about it. So being able to see that one person I inspired to share their own story and feel comfortable in that story, that's where I was. And in terms of public speaking, I was joking about this earlier, but I just think for me, it's, your story so well, and your loved one's story so well, like it can come naturally. So I just go into it like no one else knows my story better than I do, and I can go into it, and if I make a mistake or things like that, I know I made a mistake, but no one else will. And that's allowed me to be more confident in that. And secondly, your voice is in the story is important, and once you realize that, you see public speaking as an opportunity and privilege to make a difference.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of what was said. I actually started doing speech contests when I was younger because when I was really young, I had a really bad speech delay and I was never really confident in the way that I spoke. So I kind of did that as a challenge to myself to get more comfortable speaking in front of people because I wanted to be able to share my story with Barry because I felt like it was really important and I knew he didn't have the ability to do it for himself. So I wanted to become more confident speaking in front of other people, and I think that definitely really pushed me out of my comfort zone. And now I have the opposite problem where I never stop talking. So I think that definitely pushing yourself outside your comfort zone and just trying to practice, whether it be in front of small groups that you're more comfortable with, and then kind of growing to bigger and bigger groups can definitely be a helpful tactic.
Does anyone else in the room have a question for some of the panelists?
Hi there. I'm a sibling, a sister of a young one with rare disease, and I'm just wondering how you balance advocating for and speaking with and with speaking for and not overpowering their voices.
This is a great question. Alexis, I feel like maybe you start, and then Kyle, I don't know if you want to follow.
I can provide some thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something really important to consider. For me specifically, it was a little different because Barry didn't talk. But I think some way that I would try to make sure his voice was heard, because he did use his voice a lot in other ways. That was kind of what I mentioned about making sure providers spoke to him. When we would get into the room with providers, if they would just immediately start looking at me and my mom, I would say, okay, this is Barry's appointment. You didn't even ask how he is. He's not doing well. That's why why we're here, and kind of just like redirect and like remind people that he's like a human too. And when I did start doing like a little bit of advocacy informally, like when he was still alive, and I would bring him like with me, and I would kind of, like even though he couldn't talk, like include him in it, be like, oh, like Barry, like what do you think? And he'd usually just like giggle or something like that. But just like finding any ways that are appropriate for your sibling to be included. And I think that like you'll kind of like find naturally like how that helps like bond you together. And like I think that it develops over time, just like the natural balance of like what you might be more comfortable talking about versus what your sib might be talking about, like if they are able to speak. And yeah.
I can add on to that because my brother also has the same condition as me, Hunter syndrome. He's attenuated as well. And for someone that has the same condition, I've always been very thoughtful about, his experience is completely different than mine. And when I'm going to share my advocacy and my own journey, I make sure that I always clearly state I'm speaking on behalf of my experience. And I'm not speaking on behalf of the entire community, but I'm here to support the community. And with my brother, who is a sibling who's 4 years younger, he's still going through truly trusting himself and loving himself for who he is, and that's where I've supported him. So I think sometimes it's easy to be like, oh, I'm speaking on behalf of him and me, but I've even had to have conversations with him. Like I will bring him up at these conversations or at advocacy things, but I've also had to make sure that certain things aren't said. So it's a lot about finding that right balance, like you said, is, how much do you want to be a support, but how much do you also want to kind of empower them to do things? And it may be hard sometimes the ability to do that, but at the same time, like at the end of the day, having an open kind of dialogue if you are able to, and also understanding that your role that you play in as a sibling also has power and has an impact. And what does that look like? Because sometimes, like, I don't know, your perspective and the perspectives of the others on the stage is so much more in depth in certain perspectives that I would never have. So also just realize that value you have.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I have two sisters who are well as well, and they don't like to do any of the advocacy stuff, and that's totally fine. That's their right. So I actually do the same thing. Like I try to make sure to say like, this is my experience. This is like not my sister's. Like they had a different journey, and it's like their right not to speak about that.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions?
Come on.
First of all, you guys did awesome in your presentation. So thank you for sharing your stories, really impactful, and both of you are fabulous speakers. So, being here as part of Rare Disease Week and, participating in some of the advocacy activities that you guys explained is really important. I'm kind of curious how you guys share your voice online. Have you guys developed have you guys used social media or, any of these platforms to share your story? If so, like, what's been really successful for you guys? And if not, like, is there a reason?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Kyle, I'm going to pass it to you first, given the summer series webinar that we just did last summer on LinkedIn. And then Alexis, I'll pass it to you after.
Okay, well, I feel like Alexis is more the pro, but I will give it a shot here. So for me, I work in healthcare. So, and in healthcare, there's a big approach on LinkedIn. So what I've done is I've actually tied my rare disease journey to my career and really morphed it together into one brand. So I think that's something I've been very thankful for, is how can I take my advocacy, the experiences I have in my community, but also in my day-to-day work, and really create this cohesive brand. And it's been very successful on LinkedIn. So sharing about, like this week here, I'll share about what I'm doing here and how it's supporting our larger community, but how it also ties back to advocating for our patients who don't have a voice back at home. Another thing that I've been very big on in social media, more like the Instagram front, is I'm a big motivational quote guy. So I post a motivational quote every day, and that allows, how can I inspire others to be their best selves? And I even throw my own in there just for those things. But a lot of times, there are people in this room that are way better at their brand and social media around this, but I try to take the approach of like, how can I fit it into my larger story and then making it clear enough to make a broader impact to the broad audience. I think sometimes the biggest challenge is like knowing your audience. And for me, my audience is leaders in healthcare, it's advocates, it's family, things like that. And how can I be the most approachable to everybody? So that's kind of how I take it.
Yeah, I definitely haven't figured out LinkedIn yet, but I'm working on that one. So I'm glad you could answer that.
We'll sit down and walk.
Yeah, we'll have to. Yeah, I think like ever since I started being on social media, like I was always talking about Barry. Like I was literally like 12 years old on Facebook, like talking about Barry's accomplishments. So I think like from a very young age, like my social media following like knew there was going to be a big presence about Barry. And if they didn't like that, they left quickly. And I welcomed that. And I think recently, like kind of what Kyle was talking about was I've been doing like a big fundraiser. And so that's kind of like how I've been trying to really like kind of like, I guess like develop my brand. It's like weird to say that a little bit more, but I think I kind of go about it as like, this is just like honest, open Lexi sharing her story. And I do it so others can feel empowered to do it too. Like I kind of like put it out there that I'm not going to like shy away from sharing like the hard parts. I share the parts like I regret. I share the parts that I'm proud of, like, and everything in between. And for this big like fundraiser post, like what I did was because I knew it was going to be like a lot of work, and I'm in grad school and I work full time too. So like over winter break, I just sat down and like wrote a lot of the posts, like planned the pictures I was going to do and that kind of thing. And then just like saved them in my Instagram drafts and put a reminder on my phone to like post them every so often. But yeah, I think it's like definitely like a battle, like to figure out like what's the right amount to post. Cause like even with this big push, like I've noticed like definitely people like are like probably getting sick of me on Instagram, but honestly like it's what I care about the most. So I've just found that like if they don't like it, they can unfollow me and I'm okay with that. So yeah, I guess just like just put out whatever you want to, and I think like that kind of energy just attracts like who you want in your life. So yeah, I guess that's my answer.
One thing I want to add to that is I'm a big proponent of sharing your, like, if you're open at sharing your day-to-day life. Like I'm really big on sharing my travels and my experiences because I want people to know that even though I have a rare disease, it's not limiting me from what I want to do. And so my big hashtag is living life rare. Please don't steal that. I want to use it for a book. But that is kind of my approach to it. So I think sometimes even just being your normal day-to-day self and just being open and honest, like you said, being vulnerable, people love seeing that. And the people that don't, okay, they can go follow someone else.
Maybe I'm biased, but Lexi, I don't think I'm sick of your Instagram posts yet.
Not either.
Yeah, I know we had a few more questions, and I want to make sure there's time. I know someone was near the back, too. Yeah, of course.
Hi, my name is Kylie. I'm a part of YAR. But I was wondering if you guys could speak to, like, as far as, like, being a parent. I had my daughter when I was 20. She's 2 now, and she has a rare disease. So I was wondering if you could speak to what would have been helpful or what is the best approach as far as what parents can do to be helpful.
I can start. I actually had a conversation 2 nights ago with a parent of an individual that also has MPS II. And my biggest advice is, I know it's scary. I know it's challenging. I know that having a child with a rare disease can be like the unknown. But make sure that you're also looking at the good and seeing like what they can do, what they're able to be a part of, and leaning on those people that really want to support you. As I look to the way I was raised and my parents, I wouldn't change a thing because they put me in a situation and treated me as I was normal. And if there were adaptations that had to be made, they made sure they fought for them. One thing that I would say as your child gets older is empowering them to be their own advocate. Because at some point, and this is something I've even dealt with, as I got into my late adolescence, young adulthood, I'm the only one in the room with the doctor. I'm the only one advocating for myself in the classroom, things like that. And the reason I was so successful at it is because I was given the tools and the empowerment from my parents to go speak up for myself. So I think really trying to make sure that you're supporting your child, but at the same time empowering them to be the best they can be, whether it be in their own rare disease journey and also just as a human being.
Yeah, I am not a parent, so I can't say from like personal experience, but I think like in general, like the main thing I would kind of like change if I could change anything, and like Brittany and I were actually just talking about this, would be like therapy is like a really great resource. And like I wish my mom and like family would have like started therapy from a younger age, because I think it would have just been more helpful to have like an independent person like to be able to talk to like about everything I was going through too, because like being a sib is like a full-time job on top of like your school and everything like that. So I think that would have been really helpful. And honestly, I would have want my mom to go to therapy too, because she didn't really have an outlet to get like her problems out either. So I feel like sometimes like maybe like me and my sisters like took a little bit of her like the brunt from her, because she didn't really have any outlets either. So I think making sure you take care of yourself too, like that's like another thing. I know my mom didn't really take care of herself, and like now I kind of feel like I have to take care of her, because like no one else does. So I think just like making sure you make time for yourself too, and making sure your child sees that too. And yeah.
Thank you both. I know there's at least one other question in the room, if anyone still has a question for the panelists. Yeah, I'm going to say, Lindsay, can you walk it to Catherine first and then back for Lindsay up here? Sorry. And then we'll come back around.
Hey, thanks for sharing. One question I have is about sort of, I worry about the professional consequences of, being open about rare disease, especially as a young woman or young person, worrying that people would see me as less competent. I'm wondering if you've encountered any haters and how you engage or not engage with that.
Yeah, definitely. So when I was working in SMA, I was working at Boston Children's Hospital, which is where my brother received all his care. So like I pretty much couldn't go like anywhere in the hospital without like being recognized as Barry's sister. And at first, like I didn't really like love that, because I was scared. I had all those same concerns. Like I didn't want them to still like view me through the patient eye. Like I wanted them to view me as like the employee now. I think I would say like 98% of the situations, it honestly helped me. I think it helped like bond me with my patients more. And also like for most of my coworkers, I think it helped them like respect me a little bit more, because I would openly say, like when I was a patient, like this would have been really helpful to hear, like this would have really helped my family, and like that kind of thing. I can only think of like one situation where it didn't really go well. But honestly, in that situation, like that was not a bad reflection on me. Like it was someone else's something they clearly needed to work through. So yeah, I definitely shared those same concerns about like wondering if people would like I always had this fear, like people like pitied me because my brother passed away and stuff. And so sometimes I kind of tried to like separate myself from that. And like, I didn't want people to like be nicer to me just because like I lost my brother or anything like that. So that's something I was always concerned about. But in general, I think like it definitely helped like strengthen my voice at times, which I'm grateful for. And also, yeah, so I think if I could do it again, I would definitely want people to know. And like, I don't think it's a weakness, and don't think it would be for you either.
I can add to that. For me, that's been a concern, going into the profession, and, in the arena I'm in, it is healthcare, so there's some grace there. But I have been very thankful and blessed to see that I've been able to use my story to elevate the work I do, and people value it. And I think you'll realize that most people that have good intentions and good heart will take your perspective and see it as a unique thing that can really make a difference. And I work at the Cleveland Clinic. We're a well-known healthcare organization that does amazing things. And I walk through the hall and everybody knows who I am. And a lot of it was because I was open about my story. I shared it on a public forum. It's across the internet, from the CEO down. And they see it less as like as a crutch and more of as a way to empower others to be their best selves. And for me, every time I go into a boardroom or a meeting, I can speak to my own patient experience and my perspective and say, hey, this sounds great, or this sounds great, let's do this differently. So using your story and who you are to add value to the room and show that value will continue to elevate your career journey. And secondly, don't let your confidence be rested on the fact that what other people are thinking of you. You got to focus on yourself and know that you know yourself best, and you are going to do whatever you put your mind to. I'm at a point now where I'm being invited to speaking things in the healthcare industry, not because of my condition, but because of the leadership I exude. That would be whether it had a rare disease or not. The rare disease informed it. So I think it's a slow and sure process to get there, but you will find the right place where you need to be. And being open is something I always say do. Because if you can't be open in a place that you're working, you shouldn't be working there.
Yeah, I want to add for everyone from the YAR perspective, we are open to advocates across the rare disease community with any personal connection, but identifying with YAR and advocating does not have to be quite the same as disclosing your disability or rare disease if you are not ready to. I know this can be a really personal journey, especially with very real social and economic implications. So I do want to say also, we are more than willing to help you figure out how to structure your advocacy as you also figure out how to disclose. I will also just add personally, it is very exhausting to hide a rare disease if you have an invisible condition and have the choice of hiding. And sometimes the exhaustion of asking for the access you need and finding the people you care is a lot better than the exhaustion of feeling like you are always about to be discovered on top of dealing with your rare disease itself. And so obviously this is a process, but it's one that I think a lot of YAR members have gone through and understand, and that there are places to talk about. This is very much the start of it, but two very good thoughts. I want to see if anyone else in the room had a question. I know we're coming back to you for another question.
All right, so I kind of want to go back to what we all reviewed in the other room. So we're all here to participate in Hill Visits this week, and both of you seem, or it sounds like, are pretty seasoned advocates in that sense. There's a lot of like really complex topics and words and phrases and concepts that were discussed in the previous session. A couple questions. How do you guys find the pathway to identifying with or relating to these bills or proposals or asks? And then secondly, how do you guys, because I think it's so important that young people's voices are also heard in those meetings. How do you guys like make sure that your voice is heard in those discussions and oftentimes like these very adult dominated conversations?
Yeah. For your first question about like understanding the bills and everything like that, I usually like look over the one pager and then like write down like one or two sentences in my own non-political words, like what it means to me, and then like kind of use that as like an elevator pitch, just so I have like regular people vocab to use to talk about it. I know when I did the Boston State Advocacy Day, I was like trying to use legal terms and I have no legal background. So I just like admitted, I'm like, I don't know what any of these words mean, but this is what I think they mean. But yeah, Google is also a really great resource. I just like Google the parts that I don't know and then try to see if it like fits my story. If there's parts of my story that are related to the bill, of course, like those are the parts that I'm going to share. But you can also be honest, and like if it doesn't fit your story, like you just can say that and say that like, maybe like look up some other advocates and see if it's applicable to them. And then you could say like, from this other experience, I know that this would be helpful because like that kind of thing. And then honestly, I think, yeah, you're right. Like these are kind of like more adult dominated conversations, but like sometimes you just got to kind of like push your way to the top. Like I'm representing New York, and that was like a bigger state here today, and so I knew kind of going into it, I was like, oh, I don't know if there'll be the opportunity to like speak up, but I really wanted to because we put together some like really nice binders about the disease that I'm representing, and so like as almost immediately after we sat down, I was like, oh, by the way, I actually have an ask that I would like to talk about. So I just kind of like, even if I don't feel confident, I just like fake it till you make it and like say in my head, like just say it, and kind of like push through like some of that non-confidence until it like comes up in you.
First off, I don't know if I can call myself a seasoned advocate, but I appreciate that. And then just quickly, I think the one thing is knowing your story or the stories of the individuals you're advocating for, and how do you weave that in is really tying a personal experience to maybe like a simple ask, like having that kind of in your mind. So like for me, I said, having access to treatment and having, how costly it is. And while I don't front the bill, people are supporting that and like making that personal. That's the best way to do it. The second one with, the big adults in the room, just be open, put your hand up, say I'm willing to do it, and you may push people. People are most willing to be acceptable of that, but always just being like the loudest voice in the room always helps. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this is a good question to end on. So I'm going to wrap us up a little bit and take us through like some of the last materials. I do want to add, if you've not yet seen the problem solution like ask format, incredibly helpful from the standpoint of connecting your personal story. Always come back to your personal story. And staffers love to hear from young adults. Young adults are not usually the people they're meeting with on a day-to-day basis. You stand out and you are confident and memorable when telling your stories. That is a huge asset in meetings, and that is a huge asset in general when engaging with anyone who has policymaking power. So please know that as well. Speaking from a young adult perspective is a strength, not a weakness. But as I wrap us up, I want to just talk through what happens next today. There's one last breakout session after this. Please feel free to attend it either in here or in the main room. And then we'll have some different young adult events later today. The young adult meetup will be happening tonight from 7 to 8 p.m. And this will be in the Rare Hub. The address is up here. This is the Every Life office space. And if you saw the advocacy mural outside, you can see it in person here. This is presented by CSL Behring, so thank you to them for sponsoring this lovely event. And if any of you have heard of the YAR Leadership Academy or have participated, woo! The YAR Leadership Academy graduation ceremony will be available virtually later today as well, so you can hear from some of the lovely graduates who are the current and future wave of rare disease advocacy. But I hope to see many, if not all of you, at the meetup later today, and thank you so much for attending.